So, what's the worst thing you think a cop could do? Take a bribe? Plant evidence? Maybe rough up a suspect who probably had it coming? Whatever you're picturing, I'm telling you, it isn't even close. Because today, we are talking about cops who didn't just break the law, they tossed their badges and became the very monsters they were supposed to chase. Cops who worked for the mafia. Cops who tortured suspects just for the thrill. Cops who poisoned babies. And the question I can't shake is this: what happens when these guys finally land in prison? When the people running the show become the ones locked behind bars, and the justice system they once gamed turns on them. I'm Emma Chamberlain, and this is the Infographics. Today we're digging into the real stories of dirty cops who got exactly what was coming to them, and what life looked like once they were stuck in a cell with the same people they helped put away. Let's kick things off in New York City. You won't find a more infamous pair of corrupt cops in American history than Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito. They even got a nickname that nailed their double life, the Mafia Cops. To really get just how badly these guys betrayed their badges, you have to understand the world they were living in. This was New York in the 80s and 90s, when the 5 mafia families still ran half the city. The Gambinos, the Luccheses, the Colombos, these people weren't just crooks, they were basically running a shadow government. And into this mess walked 2 NYPD detectives who decided their regular paychecks just didn't cut it. Caracappa seemed hungry for cash and power, but Eppolito? He was built for this. Crime ran in his blood. His dad, Ralph Eppolito, worked with the Gambinos. His uncle and cousin, both made men, both murdered by a well-known mafia hitman. For Eppolito, the mafia wasn't the enemy, it was home. Mobster Burton Kaplan, the guy whose testimony finally took them down years later, said Caracappa and Eppolito were already dirty when they started taking kickbacks from Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the Lucchese underboss. At first, Casso paid them $4,000 a month just for inside info. But then he realized something even darker. Cops could kill mafiosos, and the mafia would pay them for it. So he started hiring them for hits, and business was good. Casso himself testified that Caracappa and Eppolito kidnapped James Heidel, a Gambino associate, and delivered him straight to Casso, who killed him. These guys weren't just taking payoffs anymore. They were murderers for hire. One of their hits ended with a dead canary shoved into the victim's mouth, a sick warning that the victim had been a snitch. They killed Gambino captain Edward Eddie Lino in a drive-by shooting in 1990. Lino was just sitting in his car when they pulled up and gunned him down. Never saw it coming. And there were more hits: a diamond dealer, a union boss. If Casso wanted someone gone, Caracappa and Eppolito handled it. When they weren't killing people, they were moving drugs, intimidating witnesses, you name it. After retiring from the NYPD, they both headed to Las Vegas, and even considered killing some of their old associates just to keep the past buried. Then things got stranger. Caracappa moved to Staten Island, worked as a private eye, and later became a corrections officer at a women's prison in Las Vegas. Just picture that, a guy who murdered for the mafia, now guarding inmates. Eppolito, on the other hand, decided to chase fame. He wrote a book, and get this, it was called Mafia Cop, the story of an honest cop whose family was the mob. Honest cop, that's what he went with. He even became friends with Joe Pesci, and landed bit parts in movies like Lost Highway, Predator 2, and Goodfellas. He was out there in the open, a killer hanging out in Hollywood. For a while, it looked like these two might actually get away with everything. Their crimes were old, witnesses were vanishing, the trail was ice cold. But then Burton Kaplan, the Brooklyn gangster from earlier, decided to save his own skin and ratted them out. And the whole house of cards came tumbling down. Cops arrested both men in 2005. The charges? Racketeering, obstruction of justice, extortion, plus 8 counts of murder and conspiracy. 8 murders. All while they were supposed to uphold the law. After years of courtroom drama, Louis Eppolito got slapped with life in prison plus 100 years. Stephen Caracappa? Life plus 80. That was it. No chance of freedom. They'd spent all their days locked up, side by side with the people they'd once put behind bars, and surrounded by mobsters they'd double-crossed. Now, this is where things really start to get wild. Prison's always tough for an ex-cop, but for a cop who sold out the mob? That's just asking for trouble, or worse. Caracappa landed at USP Coleman in Florida, a high-security federal pen. He hung on there for almost 10 years before getting moved to North Carolina. By then, cancer had chewed through him, stage 4. In his last months, he begged the judge to let him go, just so he could die somewhere that wasn't a cell. Judge Jack Weinstein shut him down, quick. "There's nothing I can do in your case," he said, and that was that. Cancer finished the job on April 8, 2017. Caracappa died in prison, alone, with nothing but the fallout from his own choices for company. Eppolito ended up at the high-security federal prison in Tucson, Arizona. That's where he spent his last 10 years, swearing up and down he was innocent, that he'd been framed, that he was the real deal, a good cop. But on November 3, 2019, Eppolito died. No one even bothered to say why. No headlines, no tears, not even a tiny blurb in the papers he used to dream would praise him. Just a quiet, bleak ending for the so-called Mafia Cops. But here's the thing I really want you to get. Caracappa and Eppolito weren't some kind of freak accident. They weren't the only cops who crossed the line. They're just the ones who got famous. Look a little closer at American policing and you'll spot a pattern that's honestly hard to stomach. Cops torturing people. Cops killing. Cops hiding behind the badge while they pull off crimes you don't even want to imagine. Which brings us to Chicago. Think the Mafia Cops were bad? Wait until you meet Jon Burge. Burge wasn't working for the mob. He wore a Chicago police badge, and he turned interrogations into straight-up torture sessions that would make a dictator jealous. Jon Burge was a detective, and later a commander in Chicago. Between 1972 and 1991, he tortured at least 118 people, almost all of them black men. And torture isn't just some dramatic word here. This wasn't a slap or a shove. Burge led a crew. He called them the Midnight Crew. And if you landed in their interrogation room, you could end up with a cattle prod pressed against you, or a plastic bag over your head until you nearly blacked out. Sometimes they'd shove a gun in your mouth, threatening to pull the trigger. They called it a mock execution. The CIA did stuff like that, and even they kept it secret. All that pain had one purpose: get a confession, true or not. Didn't matter if you had an alibi, didn't matter if you were flat out innocent. If Burge and his guys decided you were guilty, you confessed. And if you didn't, they'd force you. The Midnight Crew's brutality got so bad that it helped push Illinois to rethink the death penalty. Why? Turns out, at least 4 men were sitting on death row because Burge had tortured confessions out of them. 4 innocent men, almost killed because a cop thought the rules didn't apply to him. Burge finally lost his job in 1993, once people started piecing together what he'd really done. But here's the part that stings. He didn't go to prison until 2010. And not for torture. The statute of limitations had already run out on those crimes. No, Burge ended up in court for perjury. He lied in a civil case, swearing under oath he'd never tortured anyone. He got 4.5 years in prison, plus 3 years of supervised release. He served most of his sentence at FCI Butner Law in North Carolina, a place that, honestly, looks more like a college campus than a prison. By October 3, 2014, Burge was out, finishing his time in a halfway house. You'd think, after all the lives he ruined, Burge would have spent the rest of his days broke and miserable. That's not what happened. The city of Chicago kept sending him a $4,000 a month pension. That's the same city that had to cough up around $120 million in lawsuits and settlements for Burge's crimes. The same city whose people he terrorized for nearly 20 years. Jon Burge died less than 4 years after getting out of prison. He was 70. After he passed, something unsettling happened. His old colleagues in the Chicago Police Department and the police union started lining up to defend him. The Chicago Police Union posted on Facebook that the full story about the Burge cases has never been told. Dean Angelo, who once ran the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago, said, "I don't know that Jon Burge got a fair shake based on the years and years of service that he gave the city." Service that included torturing more than 100 people. That's what they stood up for. Now let's jump across the Atlantic to London, because this next story is even uglier. This time, the cop didn't go after criminals, he went after babies. Sometimes a cop picks up skills on the job that end up being perfect for a side hustle in crime. You won't find a better example than Rodney Whitchelo, who used to be a detective sergeant with London's Metropolitan Police. In 1986, Whitchelo sat through a seminar on corporate terrorism, basically how blackmailers threaten big companies by tampering with their products and then demand ransom money. Whoever taught that class had no clue they were giving Whitchelo a step-by-step guide for his own twisted plan. Whichelo's life was falling apart. His tiny computer company was failing, and by 1988 he had to take early retirement from the police because of asthma. There isn't much use for a stack of commendations when you're broke. So he decided to put his CID experience and his time at a chemical firm called Johnson Matthey to work. He poisoned baby food and dog food. He went after two big brands, Pedigree Pet Foods and Heinz. He put dangerous chemicals and razor blades into their cans. 5 babies ended up in the hospital. 5 infants, poisoned by a man who once swore to protect people. All for money. Not finished, he sent threatening letters to the companies, signing them Romeo and Juliet, and demanded cash to stop his attacks. This went on for 26 months. He put countless lives at risk and cost both companies tens of millions. Heinz eventually offered a £100,000 reward for information on the blackmailer. That's when Whitchelo got greedy. He tried to claim the reward himself, pretending to be a helpful citizen. He didn't realize police had staked out hundreds of ATMs. When he tried to withdraw the cash, they caught him, and his whole scheme unraveled. At his Old Bailey trial, Whitchelo insisted the cops were framing him, that he was innocent. The jury didn't buy it. He got 17 years in prison. Given his background and the fact that he poisoned babies, prison was never going to be easy for him. Still, here's the kicker. His appeal to shorten his sentence failed in 1991, but he only served half his time anyway. He got out in 1999, sparking outrage all over the UK. By then, he was 50, with white hair from all the stress. He claimed his tough time behind bars was punishment enough. After his release, Whitchelo vanished from the public eye. For all anyone knows, he could still be out there somewhere, living quietly, the ex-cop who poisoned babies. Let's head back to New York. There's another dirty cop who did time, and we know for a fact he's still out there. Michael Dowd. He might be the most interesting story on this list. Michael Dowd joined the NYPD in 1982, when New York saw about 100 murders a year. He didn't do much to bring that number down. Instead, he became a drug trafficker and muscle for the Dominican-American Diaz organization, one of the biggest crime groups around. Dowd's story starts small and petty. He hated seeing crack dealers making way more money than his $600 a week police salary. Eventually, going crooked just made sense to him. His first step over the line? He let a guy walk on thousands of dollars in unpaid parking tickets for $200 and a fancy lobster lunch. That's where it all began. When Michael Dowd joined up with the Diaz crew, the money was ridiculous. $8,000 a week plus a $24,000 signing bonus. That's way more than the Lucchesi family ever paid the so-called Mafia Cops. Suddenly, Dowd's life flipped. He bought a cherry red Corvette, 3 houses in New York, and a Florida condo. For a while, crime really did pay. He kept the cash flowing by handing over police intel to Diaz and cracking down on any rivals the crew had. But you can't outrun that kind of life forever. The drinking, the drugs, the easy money, they all caught up to him. Eventually, the hammer came down. Dowd and a bunch of other dirty cops got indicted, and the NYPD's reputation took a beating. In 1994, a judge sent him away for 16 years. He did 12. But here's where Dowd's story gets weird. He says prison changed him. In a 2015 Reddit AMA, he talked about how he got into working out, reading, and even counseling other inmates. Sounds cliché, but it checks out. Since he got out in 2004, he's kept his nose clean. These days, he mostly works in media and co-owns a legit cigar company with, get this, Adam Diaz himself, the same guy who dragged him into all this back in the 80s. It's a strange ending, not exactly justice, but maybe something like redemption, if you believe that's possible. Most guys like Dowd never get that shot. Now, let's talk about Robert Smith. When Smith finally retired from the NYPD in 2020, he'd pocketed 20 grand in bribes. His scam? Steering cops and accident victims toward a towing company he secretly owned a piece of. He actually bragged about being one of the most corrupt cops in the 105, his precinct out in Queens. But the bribery was just the tip of the iceberg. Smith had a nasty streak. He'd roll up on random black folks, point his gun at them, and watch their reactions for kicks. Then he'd text his buddies about it, dropping racist slurs and laughing it up. He refused to give his badge number, hustled strangers, and spewed racist and sexist garbage at work. By the time he hung up his badge, Smith racked up 33 official complaints. You'd think he'd quit while he was ahead. Nope. As soon as he left the force at 45, he tried to launch a new career selling hard drugs. He started by approaching two guys he thought were fellow dealers. Turns out, they were undercover cops. Smith even told them he'd flash his old badge and carry his gun on the job. And then, to top it off, he tried to buy a kilo of heroin from a third undercover cop, handing over $1,200 in cash. When he finally got arrested and put on trial in 2022, Smith broke down in court, crying and admitting, "I did wrong. I had no excuses for what I've done. I know I deserve to go to prison." On his way down, he dragged a few other dirty cops with him. The judge gave him just over 8 years inside. Even his lawyer, Andrew Frisch, didn't sugarcoat it. He said Smith's walking into prison with 2 targets on his back. He's a cop and he's a rat. That's about as dangerous as it gets. So, what do you make of all this? What's the takeaway from these stories of guys who wore the badge and threw it all away? Maybe power really does corrupt. Maybe the systems we trust to protect us can just as easily turn against us. Maybe prison, broken as it is, sometimes delivers a rough kind of justice. The Mafia Cops died in cells. Jon Burge died disgraced, pension intact. Rodney Whitchelo got out early and vanished. Michael Dowd got something like redemption. Robert Smith's locked up now, probably looking over his shoulder every day, wondering if the guy in the next bank knows his story. But here's the thing I can't shake. How many more are out there? How many cops are still wearing the badge, hiding in plain sight, just waiting for their own secrets to catch up with them? We like to believe the system works. We want to think corrupt cops get caught, justice comes eventually, and the good guys always win. But these stories? They paint a different picture. Corruption can rot away for years without anyone noticing. Torturers end up retiring with full pensions. People who poison babies walk out of prison halfway through their sentences. Sure, you get a Michael Dowd who turns things around, but for every one of him, there's a Robert Smith who just sinks deeper. The truth is, the system fails, a lot, but not all the time. Sometimes the Mafia Cops die behind bars. Sometimes the torturer leaves this world in disgrace. Sometimes the rat finally gets what he deserves. Maybe that's all we can ask for. Not perfect justice, but just enough to remind us that what you do matters. That a badge isn't a free pass. That the uniform can't save you from your own choices. Because prison has its own code. And for dirty cops on the inside, karma doesn't give a warning. It kicks the door off its hinges. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive on the infographics. If these stories shocked you, made you angry, or just got you thinking, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps the channel out and it lets us know you want more stuff like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. We've got some wild deep dives coming up, more stories about corruption, justice, and those weird places where they get tangled together. I want to hear from you. Which story hit you the hardest? Was it the Mafia Cops who went on to acting? The torture commander who kept his pension? The baby poisoner who walked after 9 years? Tell us in the comments. I read every single one, and what you say actually shapes what we do next. And hey, share this video with someone who needs a reality check. Someone who still thinks the system never fails. Someone who should know that justice isn't simple or quick or always satisfying. That's all for today. I'm Emma Chamberlain, this is the infographics. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and always ask who's really wearing the badge. Catch you next time.